Picture this. It's the Midwest in the early 1980s, and police keep finding young men dumped along highways, bound, mutilated, their throats slit, their lives all erased with terrifying precision. Each crime scene seems to be more brutal than the one before. For years, this killer would walk free, blending into everyday life, even as the death toll continued to mount. This wasn't a random murder spree, this was a calculated hunt. And the man behind it all? Larry Eyler. Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, or welcome to my channel if you are new here. I hope you're all doing so well. Welcome back to another true crime and makeup episode. Oh yeah. As you can tell from the title, the intro, and possibly the thumbnail, today we are diving into the case of Larry Eyler. Just saying that man's name makes me want to be sick, because the audacity of this man and his moustache. I hate him, I loathe him, I despise him in every single context of the word. And we're going to be diving into all of that today. But before I do dive in, if you are new here, hi, my name is Anna. I am a certified yapper. It's true. The rumours are confirmed. I am a certified yapper. I could yap all day, every day about true crime. So I decided I'm going to hop on here twice a week, every single week on a Wednesday and Sunday. We sit down and we talk about a true crime case that is keeping me up at night. Because if it's on my mind, it's only fair if it's on yours too. So, if true crime is your jam, I highly suggest you subscribe, get the notification bell on, because, like I said, I'm here for you twice a week, every single week, and it's free. Any details you need regarding me, myself, and I, they can all be found listed in the description box down below, including any products used on my face today. Please don't forget to engage with this video in some way. It honestly helps me out so much. A like, a comment, a share. Please don't forget to subscribe, and if you can, I would really appreciate if you can hype this video, because I need your hype points. Oh my god! I was saying the audacity of that man and his moustache, and I'm on here with lipstick in my teeth. Oh, damn it. Listen, I've committed to the cause now, please just ignore that. Yeah, please subscribe, but without any further rambling and any further ado and any lipstick on my teeth, let's get into the horrifying, bone-chilling case of Larry Eyler. Now, believe me when I tell you this case, I think it's going to be a long one, and I believe it's going to be so long that I've actually had to order an Amazon SD card. I'm waiting on the Amazon guy coming because I just don't think my little SD card has enough storage for how long this case is going to be. I've got 15 pages worth of notes. That is a lot for me. So this loser, Larry Eyler, he burdened the world when he was born on December the 22nd of 1952. He was born in Crawfordsville of Indiana. He was born to his father, George Howard Eyler, and then his mother, who was Shirley Phyllis Kennedy. And these parents, oh, they're not winning any Parent of the Year awards. Probably worst Parent of the Year awards, they could win that, but certainly no prizes for being a good parent. So Larry's father, George, he made it very clear to Larry that he was an unwanted child. They already had 3 children, he was the youngest, and he just tipped him over the edge. Now, George, he really struggled with alcoholism, which, as we know, is an awful, terrible, horrific disease for people to suffer from. But whilst he suffers from this alcoholism, that cannot excuse how vile and how terrible this man was to his own family. He would beat every single member of his family, especially his wife and especially Larry. He's seen them as his personal punching bag. Now, Shirley, on the other hand, she was trying to do her best. She was working waitressing jobs, factory jobs, trying to get money to keep this family afloat, because any money George got, he was just drinking it. Now, by mid-1955, the marriage between Shirley and George just completely imploded. They couldn't make it work anymore. Shirley was just sick of Georgie's. After the marriage imploded, Larry and his younger sisters, they would be bounced around from babysitters, foster homes, family homes, and then just handed over to the siblings who were literally children themselves. Shirley was a woman who really just wanted to be loved. She wanted someone there who cared for her, and so she was constantly seeking new relationships. In 1957, she would marry another man who was also an abusive alcoholic. They divorced a year later because, well, of course they did. She then married again in 1960. This would also result in divorce for the exact same reasons. She would then marry again in 1972, and do you think that one worked out? And if you're keeping count, that is 4 weddings and a load of hangovers. Every single stepfather that came into the lives of Larry and his siblings, they were always alcoholics who were abusive. They drank hard and they hit harder. There was actually one evil monstrosity of a stepdad who would discipline Larry by holding his head under scalding hot water just to teach him a lesson. That was that man's idea of discipline, which, if you ask me, is complete sadism. That is a parenting strategy lifted right out a horror novel. By the time Larry hit grade school, he was practically fluent in all things neglect, trauma, and rejection. He went on to attend St. Joseph High School in Lebanon, Indiana. He was tall, he was socially awkward, he was broke, he wasn't wearing the best clothes or the best shoes, and this just made him catnip for bullies. Now, his sister Teresa, she would often have to step in because Larry was someone who couldn't really defend himself. So Teresa steps in as this unofficial bodyguard, having to ward off all his bullies. And that in itself was a humiliating thing to Larry, because why is it that his sister could ward off these bullies but he couldn't do it himself? It made him feel weak, even though Teresa was just trying to help and protect him. Now, teachers at the time, they had stated that they thought he was a very quiet, likeable child. He was polite enough, he was well behaved to start with. But of course, as time goes on, there's only so much you can take within school before you start acting out as well. And when he finally did act out and become stubborn, Shirley immediately shipped him off to a school for unruly boys, because God forbid you stick up for yourself against bullies. Now, this happened in 1963, and Larry, he would beg, sob and plead to come back home. He hated this school that he had been shipped off to. And to be fair to him, his crying and whining, it did work, because he would return home, but not before psychologists could get their hands on him. Psychologists had stated he was a young man with average intelligence, he was severely insecure, and not only that, but he had this extreme fear of abandonment. And I mean, who can blame him? He's been abandoned his whole life. These psychologists, they had recommended that Larry go on to attend this Catholic boys' home, which was in Fort Wayne. And Larry did as was suggested. He went off to this Catholic boys' home. He would spend 6 months there, but again, he just pinballed and boomeranged his way back home because he can't really stick anything out. So then good old puberty hit. One of the most confusing and emotional times in any developing child's life. And for Larry, this was no easier. Larry had very quickly realised that he was in fact gay. And this was something he resented so much about himself. This is something that should be celebrated. People should feel comfortable and confident being who they are and loving who they love. And yet this young boy, he hated himself more than anyone else could possibly. Now, he did come out to some of his closest family members, and 1960s Indiana, how much support did he really get? I'll tell you, wasn't much. And although he came out to his family trying to be confident and carry himself with pride, he was constantly marinating in this self-hatred. In high school, he did try and date some girls, but of course, none of these dates with these girls would stick because he wasn't attracted to vaginas, and that's okay. Now, he did confide in a few people regarding his religious guilt and also his sexual confusion. But again, this was a time where people weren't really empathetic toward that. So although he's trying to open up, people would just get really awkward and shut down the conversation before he could really fully open himself up to them. When it came down to academics, our boy Larry, he is on the struggle bus, okay? Academically, he was a bit of a mess. He completely flunked high school, although he was able to snag a GED, and he wore that like a badge of honour. He would drift throughout odd jobs. The first was a private security guard at Marion General Hospital. 6 months in, he was fired. Wasn't very good at the job, and he was actually kind of creeping out the very people he should have been guarding. Then he decided he was going to work at a shoe store, which, wasn't much better. And it was around this very same time where Larry, he starts haunting gay bars the way ghosts haunt old houses. But the reason he was doing this is he wanted a place where he could just be himself and, test the waters with some casual hookups, get with some guys, maybe try and become more confident and secure in who he was. But this didn't work for him because the more casual hookups he was having, the more sex he was having with men, this shame just seemed to intensify. Which is really, really awful. I mean, listen, this guy is a complete scumbag monster. We can't defend him, but we can have sympathy for the struggles that they have growing up. Doesn't mean we sympathise later in life, because I definitely don't. I hate this freak, but I can empathise with the struggles in his childhood and his adolescence. Now, men that he would have casual hookups with, they would later claim that Larry, when they were having sex, he couldn't look them in the eye. He couldn't look the direction they were on, and again, this was all shame related. But not only this, Larry would start shouting stuff. They're in the midst of a heated frenzy of love, and he starts shouting you're a slut, you're a bitch, you're a whore. And the guys were just kind of oh, I mean, this is the same guy that can't even look me in my eyeballs. And he's, calling me a slut and a bitch and a whore. So by mid-1970s, Larry is a well-known figure and face within the gay community, especially around the gay scene within pubs and clubs, things like that. And he was especially known in the leather crowd. Yeah, baby boy likes his leather. When we picture Larry, picture this. A guy strutting into a club. He's got a tight leather t-shirt on. He's got a smirk across his face. When he's not there, he's pumping iron at the gym. And not only that, but he's acting like he is God's gift to the Midwest just because he has a little bit of muscle on him. Now, a lot of people around this time, they did actually see him as this good-looking bodybuilder. Good-looking is, debatable. I've seen the moustache, but hey, different time. But many people believed he was this good guy who was so devout to his mother and his sisters and wanting to protect them. And then there was other people, those who had once got close with Larry, and they said that behind closed doors, it was a nightmare. They seen something far darker in him, and they would describe how Mr. Chill would very quickly turn into Mr. Psycho. And it was evident that Mr. Psycho would come out as soon as the bedroom doors were closed. This man, once that bedroom door closed, he became a fully fledged sadist. He didn't care what his partner was comfortable with in the bedroom or what his partner wanted. He would just do everything he wanted. He would beat his partners, he would use knives and razors to slice open their flesh. And this sadistic streak, that wasn't some kind of rumour. This was a preview of the later show. Now, by day, Larry was working as a house painter, and by night, he would cosplay as a Marine, despite never serving a day in his life. He would strut around in camel print as if that hid the fact that he was a fully fledged creep predator. And it was around this same time that he moved into a condo in Terre Haute. He moved into this condo with a man by the name of Robert David Little, who was a 38-year-old library science professor who, if we're describing him very generously, we would call him a lonely creep. And that is me being very generous. I could go harder. The pair had met at ISU in 1974, and Larry would later state that Robert Little was somewhat of a father figure to him, like the father he never had. And we will find out later down the line that this father role that Robert was taking on wasn't as innocent as it might sound. So then Larry and Robert, they start going around the gay bars together. They're like a wee tag team, like you wingman me, I'll wingman you, let's bring these men home. But, Robert, he was socially awkward and he wasn't good looking by any means, but in my opinion, neither was Larry. And Robert really struggled to meet any men on his own, whereas Larry, he was the one who had the looks. And make sure if you're listening, you know that I've put this in air quotes. So it would usually be Larry that was, front and centre, trying to meet and greet these men and bring them home to their little condo. And he would bring them home under the pretense that they were going to have a fun time. Now the thing is, it's unknown to this day with all of these interactions that he had. Were these consensual interactions he had with these men? Were they pressured? That is one thing we may never ever know. But what is very clear in this story is that this condo that Robert and Larry had shared, this almost became the base for their predatory, stalking nightlife style. And it was here in this very odd couple arrangement that Larry's fantasies, his violent, sadistic fantasies, would be fed, reinforced, and given a place to grow in private. It was then on August the 3rd of 1978 when creepy cretin Larry, he would go from creepy guy at the bar to attempted murderer. On this night, he would pick up 19-year-old hitchhiker Craig Long. And he would use the standard predator blueprint, the lure, proposition, intimidation. And when Craig started to feel like this situation was dangerous, when Craig tried to make like a treat and leave, Larry didn't just let him go. He would press a knife to Craig's chest. Craig at this point is absolutely terrified and he starts telling Larry, listen, I don't have any money. I don't have anything of value to you. Just let me go. And Larry would chillingly respond. And he told Craig, it's not your money I'm interested in. Larry at this point, he would drive him and Craig to this rural field. He forces Craig to strip naked. He would handcuff him, bound his ankles. And then he threw Craig into the back of his truck and Larry himself, he starts to undress. And Craig can see where this is going. And he actually sees an opening where he might be able to escape. Larry's trousers are around his frickin' ankles, so if he tries to run, he's most likely going to fall. Craig does his best to escape. He gets out of this truck and he tries his best to run, but Larry is right there behind him. I don't know how he's doing it, but he is keeping up with Craig. And then Craig would feel a plunge into his chest. He had been stabbed. And this would actually puncture his lung, but Craig, he would prove that he is 10 times smarter than Larry Eyler could ever dream to be, and he immediately plays dead. Larry at this point, he assumes that he has in fact murdered Craig. And when Larry takes off, Craig then makes a run for it. He is bleeding, he is exhausted, like near the point of passing out. Of course he is, he's losing blood. He makes it to a resident's house and he tells the resident what's happened to him and that they need to phone the police. And you're not going to believe the audacity of Larry Eyler, because he catches on that Craig has made his way over to someone's house and he goes over to this resident's house and acts like he's there to pick up a lost and found missing wallet. Now, police very quickly arrive and Larry, when he's talking to them, he's like, oh no, the stabbing was simply an accident. Here's the keys to the cuffs. Like, we were just playing and it got a bit heated. I don't think this guy realises, but that is not how accidents work. Now, the police, they would immediately search his truck and what they find in there is basically a starter kit for a serial killer convention. A hunting knife, a butcher's knife, handcuffs, a metal-tipped whip, tear gas, another set of handcuffs, rope, and yes, a sword. Because, I mean, what everyday house painter doesn't have a sword in the back of their truck? I mean, that's a necessity in the painting business, surely. On it, like, does he think we are buttoned up the back? But at this point, this is when Larry has a moment with himself where he's like, you know what, I've learned my lesson. I understand now. And I was like, oh, lesson learned? Like, is he going to become a changed man? Of course not. Because we probably wouldn't be here telling this horrific case if he had changed. The lesson learned by Larry wasn't that attempted murder is bad or murder is bad or sexually abusing people is bad. His lesson learned was that he can never ever leave a victim. He can never ever leave a witness. So when he strikes again, and he will, every victim must die. Not only that, but he has to be sure that they are in fact dead. Now, the legal aftermath of this horrifying incident that Craig had suffered, that trauma that this young boy had went through, it was a freaking legal farce. So Larry Eyler, he faced charges of aggravated battery, and initially he pleads guilty to this, right? So friends, family, whoever else, they seemed to condone his behaviour. They would raise the $10,000 bond, so then Larry was released on bail. Then Larry's lawyer, he would offer Craig Long $2,500. Where did this money come from? It came from Robert Little. And this would be in exchange for dropping the charges. Craig Long at this point is traumatized, okay? He is living in fear and terror. He just wants to be able to move on from this. He wants to be able to get on with his life. So he took the deal. At this point, Larry then switches his plea to not guilty. And in November, he would walk out of that court with an acquittal and a $43 court fee. Can we even call this a slap on the wrist for attempted murder? Because it feels even lighter than a slap on the wrist. So then we fast forward to August of 1981, and shockingly, don't know how it happened, Larry was able to get himself into what appeared to be a real relationship, but it was definitely as toxic as you would expect. And this is when 20-year-old John Dobrovolsky, he enters the scene. Now, he's a married man, he's living in Chicago, he has children, 2 kids of his own and 3 foster kids that they have also taken in. But this was a man who outwardly appeared heterosexual, but he was actually a gay man. Now, his wife Sally, shockingly, I mean, she definitely loved this man because she was tolerant to the fact that he wanted to have gay relationships whilst maintaining their marriage together. Sally would even allow for Larry Eyler to crash at their place at the weekend like a live-in lover. Not just that, but he paid 1/3 of the rent. It was like this, a triangle, apart from Sally was never allowed in the good stuff. Now, Larry and John, both of them were into this sadomasochistic sex life, which in itself is not a crime as long as it's consensual. Whatever blows your hair back, go for it. But over time, Larry would gradually take this to a completely new level of degradation. He was tying John up to devices. He would beat him, he was lashing him, all while spewing these curses, you're a whore, you're a bitch, and whatever else. And then he capped it all off with sex, as if that made it all better. And not only was their sex life explosive, so was any fights that they had. Any arguments were huge. And the fights always seemed to be Larry accusing John of infidelity. I mean, if that's not the pot calling the kettle black, like, you're quite happy for him to be cheating on his wife with you, but you don't want him to have anyone else. He's hardly living the life of fidelity, do you know what I mean? And Larry himself, he wasn't monogamous either. He was sleeping with other men at the time, so he's got a freaking cheek. Now, John, he would respond to these claims by Larry by slapping him, beating him, and weirdly enough, Larry never ever used to hit John back. I don't know why, because I would expect that he would, but he didn't. Robert Little, remember the little father figure, he would always be niggling at Larry. He was always trying to put him off his relationship with John. Could it be that the father figure actually wanted to be the lover figure? I think so. So by this point, Larry Eyler, he is living a double life within Illinois and then Indiana. During the week, he was playing the role of live-in lover with John's family. And then on Saturdays, he would drive to Indiana, he would work as a liquor store clerk, and that is when he would go back to the condo with Robert Little in Terre Haute. 2 states, 2 lives, 2 men. And underneath it all, his violent fantasies, his violent urges, they were only intensifying by the day. Between 1982 and 1984, Larry would go from full-blown freak, creep, cretin weirdo to a highway ghoul. He would be tied to at least 21 murders of young men. It is debated that no one truly knows what that real number would be, and many believe that it would be well over 70. Now, the MO that he would use, it was always consistent. He would lure these men. He would usually knock them out with booze or pills or a combination of both. After this, he would bind them, and then this is when he would release his sadomasochistic rage before then stabbing them to death. He would mostly attack them in the chest or abdomen area. And it seemed to be that his place to dump these young men's bodies was near interstates. He would leave their pants and their underwear down around their ankles, and usually their shirts and their wallets would be missing. Some of his victims were even disemboweled. He had also dismembered at least 4 of his victims, and every single case, every single young man was discarded like trash. Now, it's stated that October the 12th of 1982, this would be the first time that this killing spree would reveal itself. Larry Eyler would lure 21-year-old Craig Townsend into his vehicle in Crown Point of Indiana. Once Craig was in this vehicle, Larry would then drive him to this rural field where he would drug, beat and slash this young man. He then dumped Craig's body in this field. He was comatose and freezing. This young man probably should have died, but thankfully he would live. By some miracle, this young man pulled through. And this is yet another reminder that Larry Eyler is a pathetic, weaselly little loser who is as sloppy and reckless as ever. His system, as he would call it, he still couldn't get it perfect. However, 11 days later, Eyler would try again. He would abduct 19-year-old Stephen Crockett, and this time, this young man, he wouldn't get away. His body would turn up 12 hours later, abandoned in a Kankakee County cornfield. He had been stabbed 32 times, 4 of them being in his head. Then just 1 week later, after the murder of Stephen, Larry would strike again. It was October the 30th, and 26-year-old Edgar Undercloffler, he would vanish from Rantoul, Illinois. This young man's body wouldn't surface until March of 1983. The following month, Larry would kill again. 25-year-old barman John Johnson. His body would be found a month later in Lowell of Indiana, and he was killed in exactly the same way. And then November the 20th would bring the abduction of a 19-year-old boy. This young boy was William Lewis. He was hitchhiking at the time when Larry approached him, and he would be stabbed to death and buried near Rensselaer. Larry's pace of his murders was very quickly escalating. He is trying to kill on a weekly or monthly basis, truly killing whenever he can, whenever he sees an opportunity. So then we come to December the 19th, and 23-year-old Stephen Egan, he would be taken from Terre Haute. This young man's body would be found 9 days later, and when investigators found it, they honestly just found something straight out of a nightmare. So his body had been found near Indiana Route State 173, and his body was found in like this abandoned farm outbuilding. There was chunks of human flesh that was clinging onto plaster, and this had suggested to police that this young man had been suspended and restrained when Eyler was slashing and stabbing him. Coroner Dr. John Pless, he had said that there was tremendous rage in this killing. It was evident from the wounds that had been inflicted to this young man. And with this murder, he had suspected that there was possibly more than one perpetrator. And the very same day that Pless finished the autopsy of Stephen Egan, there would be another victim. And that was 21-year-old John Roach. His body would turn up near Interstate 70, and his injuries were eerily similar to that of Stephen. By December the 30th, Larry Eyler, he had then snatched a 22-year-old Yale graduate by the name of David Block from Highland Park. Now, David, his case actually made the headlines because he was a Yale graduate. And listen, I am all for victims getting headlines. They should be in the news, every single one of them. But the young hitchhikers, why were they not making headlines? Why is it because someone is a Yale graduate that their case gets to make the headlines? Every victim is equally as important. And it's heartbreaking to think that these other young men, because they were hitchhikers, because they were maybe drifting around, they weren't deemed as important, and that breaks my heart because every single one of them are just as important as each other. Now, this young boy, he had been en route to a friend's house when he just randomly vanished. Devastatingly, his body wouldn't be found until May of 1984. Then on January the 24th of 1983, Larry Eyler, yet again, this cretin, he goes after another victim. This was 16-year-old Irvin Gibson. He was abducted in Lake County, Illinois, and his body wouldn't be found until April. When his body was recovered, they had found that he was dumped on top of a dead dog, a dog that Larry had also stabbed to death. Between March and April of 1983, this monster, he was believed to have killed at least 5 more victims aged 17 to 29. May the 9th seen the discovery of Daniel McNeve. He was only 21 years old and his body would be found near Indiana State Road 39. This young boy had 11 knife wounds to his neck, 5 to his back and 11 to his abdomen. His intestines were protruding from his body when he was found. He had welt marks on his wrists and his ankles, which indicated that he had been bound and restrained. And just like many others, his jeans were down around his ankles, his underwear was down around his ankles. 9 days later, Larry Eyler, he would kill again. This time it was 25-year-old Richard Bruce, and he would be murdered in Effingham of Illinois. This young man's body was tossed off a bridge, disposed of like he was garbage, and it would lay in a creek until December. By early 1983, the people within the gay community, they were connecting the dots before the police were even connecting the dots. It was very clear to them that there was a predator going after gay men to murder and mutilate them. Now, there was a newspaper, and it was said to be a gay newspaper, correct me if I'm wrong, but it was called Work7. Now, they had set up a hotline, and they were offering a $1,500 reward for anyone who could come forward and offer some information that would help catch this predator and keep other young men safe. They had speculated that this man, he was a self-hating man who couldn't deal and come to terms with his sexuality, and so he punished the ones who could. In the meantime, police were raiding these bars, they were videotaping the patrons, and honestly, it seemed like they were punishing the public rather than trying to protect them. Now, as it always seems to with certain members of law enforcement, it takes a while for the dots to connect. That's why the public seems to connect them first. But 6 days after McNeve's body was found, Indiana State Police, they would convene 35 detectives from 4 different jurisdictions. They all come to a conclusion that it was one man at the helm of these murders. Now, I need to read this off my notes because I keep getting tongue twisted. So, what they had done is they had created the Central Indiana Multi-Agency Investigation Team, which is better known as CIMAIT or CIMATE. And I think I'm probably going to have to call it CIMATE because there's no way I'm going to remember that. Now, this was headed by Lieutenant Jerry Campbell, and he was basically the one who had to share intel, he had to pull manpower, and also build a computerized database so they could keep track of everything going on surrounding this case, which I have to say is very cutting edge technology for 1983. And it's finally at this point when Larry Eyler, obviously they don't know yet that it's Larry Eyler, but it's at this point that he is more than a rumour. He is officially a target, and this manhunt was about to begin. So the brand new task force of CIMATE, they were basically the Avengers of the Midwest. So they go to the FBI's National Crime Information Centre and they basically say, we've got this guy and he is abducting young males, he is stabbing them and mutilating them. Please give us a call if any of this rings a bell to you, if you have any similar cases. And the calls come in almost immediately. The police of Kentucky, they had reported 29-year-old Jay Reynolds. He had been stabbed to death back in March in Madison County. They believe that his body, where it was killed and where it ended up, was different, so they believed that he had been moved from the area post-mortem. And then Chicago rings up. An 18-year-old boy, Jimmy Roberts, found in Thorn Creek with 35 stab wounds. Now, CIMATE, they slap a nickname on this ghost and ghoul who's haunting people, and they called him the Highway Murderer. Now, June the 6th, 1983, the first break would come in, and this was one of Larry Eyler's former lovers, Thomas Henderson. He would call the confidential hotline, and he basically gave them the serial killer rundown that is Larry Eyler. Violent temper, bondage kink, arrested in 1978 for stabbing a teenage hitchhiker. And not only this, but he would throw in an extra horror story. He had said that in May of 1982, Larry, he had abducted and drugged a 14-year-old boy and then dumped him away somewhere. Now, he wasn't molested, he wasn't killed, and police believe this was almost like a test run of how to carry out these murders. Now, Henderson had also given up Larry's weekend gig at the liquor store working as a clerk, and also him being shacked up with the older man in Terre Haute. In this one call, Henderson has practically outed Larry's double life that he's been living. So the police, they take Larry's details and they put it into their database, and the results make them nearly faint on the spot, because there they have it in black and white, that 1978 arrest, that attempted murder. The handcuffs, the bindings, they all match the current MO. And Larry Eyler, he's known to bounce between Indianapolis and Illinois like a frickin' pinball machine. The whole thing screamed, this is our guy. But unfortunately, a scream is not evidence. At this point, they don't even have enough to get a search warrant. They also can't get full surveillance, so they'd start to quietly track him, hoping that he's going to slip up. So then Psymate, they ask the FBI to conjure up a profile of mystery Mr. Murder Man. And what they come back with, I swear to God, it could have been Larry Eyler's frickin' Tinder bio. White male, late 20s to early 30s, works menial jobs, rough exterior, a deep hatred for his attraction to men, projects a masculine image, hangs out with guys at bars, pretends to hate gay men to mask his own desires, a night owl with rage issues. And the cherry on top of this, I swear there must have been a psychic medium working here, because the cherry on top of this cake is the profile predicted that he might have a middle-aged, middle-class, smarter accomplice who had assisted in the early kills. Hi Robert Little, how are you sick weaselly little scumbag? Now the FBI, they had also predicted that this man covers his victims with soil and dirt, and this is to try and erase his crimes, which is very Larry Eyler coded because let's be honest, he is not the sharpest knife in the drawer. They had pegged this man as being very physically strong, and this is why he was able to overpower these young athletic men. And the welts on the wrists and the ankles, the bindings, this all showed that to be true. Larry Eyler is basically embodying and doing everything that this FBI profile has noted. He's ticking every checkbox. The only thing that's missing from this man is a frickin' neon sign that follows him around that says serial killer at work. So by the summer of '83, the highway murderer, their body count was just snowballing out of control. On July the 2nd, two farmers who were west of Paxton, Illinois, they stumbled across the partially naked body of a young Hispanic male. He had been stabbed repeatedly in the abdomen, and it was believed that he had been dead since the late June. Just 8 weeks later, August the 31st, a tree trimming crew near Route 60 in Illinois, they would find the body of 28-year-old Ralph Calise. His body had just been discarded like trash. He had been stabbed 17 times. It was said that he had been stabbed with a butcher knife so savagely that his intestines were protruding from his body. Now, there was a Chicago reporter, Geraldine Colerick. She had noticed this pattern and she started connecting the dots very publicly. She was able to dig deeper with Cook County cops, and she was able to unearth another 2 cases from Uptown in 1982. Young males who had been stabbed to death, their pants and trousers around their ankles. Bodies dumped in Kankakee County, Illinois. Then on September the 8th, investigators from every jurisdiction, they all met up in Crown Point to basically compare their notes. And when the smoke cleared, 5 more deaths were officially linked to the highway murderer. At this point, the task force's body count had just jumped to 17. Now, the next discovery on October the 4th was deemed to be one of the most grisliest they had ever uncovered. Mushroom hunters in Kenosha County of Wisconsin, they had spotted a plastic bag with something inside it. When they got closer, they realised that the item inside this plastic bag was a frickin' torso. On October the 11th, this torso was successfully ID'd and belonged to 18-year-old Eric Hansen. He had last been seen alive on September the 27th in Milwaukee. This young man had literally been butchered. His head, arms and legs had been sawn off with a hacksaw. His torso was completely drained of blood, and his hands and head, they were never found. From October the 18th to the 19th, 4 bodies would be unearthed near an oak tree in an abandoned farmhouse in Lake Village of Indiana. They were all partially buried. They had all been dead for months. The trousers had all been disturbed in the same way, bunched up at the ankles. 3 white victims had been lined up 3 feet apart with their heads facing north, and the 4th body was that of an African-American young man. Every single one of them had been stabbed at least a dozen times with a knife that was said to be at least 8 inches long. On December the 7th, a hunter near US Route 40, he would uncover another body. This was the body of 17-year-old Richard Wayne. This young boy had been missing since March the 20th when he was travelling to Indiana from California. Right beside him, underneath the burned remains of a motorhome, was another victim. An African-American young male around 5'9" who still remains unidentified. And whilst all of this is unfolding, whilst people are finding these horrors and witnessing a trauma that's going to last them a lifetime, Eyler was doing as usual. He was on the road enjoying himself. On September the 30th of 1983, he's driving along Interstate 65 near Lowell, Indiana, and he's got a young hitchhiker in the car with him. And by luck, the police, they have to pull him over to perform a routine traffic stop. And when they do, when they look inside this vehicle, serial killer kit. Now initially, Eyler and the hitchhiker, they're taken in for questioning. At first, Eyler, he is charged for soliciting sex from this young male. By 1:30 p.m, Psymate, they have this man in an investigation room. And they tell him straight, listen, you are a suspect in a string of murders. They explain how an anonymous call, that call from the former lover, well, this had put him on the radar. And Larry Eyler, he's acting cool, calm and collected. He's talking about everything except his sexuality. When he's confronted with names such as John Roach, Daniel McNeve, he barely even flinches and he says, I've heard the names, I've read about them in the Indianapolis Star, but don't know them. Now, he agrees for his vehicle to be searched, his fingerprints to be taken, a mugshot to be taken, and he even agrees to a future polygraph. Now, there's no confession, but for the first time, they are able to light up this criminal like a Christmas tree. Now, investigators, they would tear through his vehicle. I mean, they're ripping out the seats, they're ripping out the boot. They are really going to town to find something, and they would find something. Yes, they would. They would find a mobile torture kit. Knives, rope, handcuffs, ankle binds, wrist straps, a hammer, 2 baseball bats, a mallet, surgical tape. Impressions had been taken from Larry's boots, right? And these impressions, they would match plaster casts that had been taken from the scene where Ralph Khaleesi's body had been found. And Larry's boot imprints perfectly matched the plaster casts, even down to the wear marks on the sole. Tyre tracks from his 4 Death series, they had also matched the tyre tracks at the scene. Yet after all of this, after analysing his truck, finding all these items, finding the matching plaster cast that perfectly matched his boots, he was let go. But behind the scenes, the police knew that they were close, they just didn't want to strike too early. But in the early hours of October the 1st, the Psymate, they had secured a search warrant for Robert Little's condo in Terre Haute. And when they searched this, they would find circumstantial gold, shall we say. They would find credit card receipts that basically showed that Larry Eyler, he had been in the right jurisdictions at the right times. There was also phone bills that showed that calls had been made to Robert Little after the time the murders were suspected to have been committed. There was even one call that had come from a payphone that was directly near the site where Gustavo Herrera, his body had been found. Hospital records, they had confirmed that Larry had basically went in for a deep cut on his hand that very same day that Gustavo had been killed. Now Larry says, I've done it falling on glass, clumsy me. Receipts had shown that the very next day he had bought a new knife and new handcuffs. Very strange. Investigators then learn that Larry and Robert Little, they had returned from a New York vacation days before the murder of Ralph Khaleesi. One of the task force members, they had stated if Larry Eyler is not the killer, then he is frickin' following the real one around. So October the 2nd, Larry's vehicle is seized and he would be driven to further questioning by investigator Dan Collin. This time in this interview, Larry would admit that he liked dominant bondage play. He had said that his earlier relationship with Dobrovolsky was very volatile, it was very violent, but he denied knowing Ralph Khaleesi or ever visiting that murder scene. Now Collin had pushed and he had said, Larry, we know something about you. You'd fight with John and pick someone else and stab him because you think it's John. Now when they said this to Larry, Larry starts to flinch. He's getting all psyched out, how the hell do they know this? It's almost like they are FBI who profile people. How strange. So there wasn't enough to formally charge Larry at this point. He is released on October the 4th, and I know this makes me infuriated as well. The minute he's released, he would hire a lawyer, and when he does this, he would file a civil suit for $250,000 on October the 11th. Now this was against the Lake County Sheriff and also the Indiana State Police, and he was basically saying, they're harassing me, they're following me, help me. He had claimed that his civil rights had been violated. Now meanwhile, on October the 6th, an FBI lab, they are running Larry's boot prints, they're running it with the cast, they're making sure that everything lines up. There was 4 distinctive wear marks that all completely matched The tyre tracks from the scene, they had also matched that of Larry's F4 Series vehicle. Everything was lining up. Then when they took a sample from the bottom of Larry's boots, there was blood. And this blood was type A blood. Now obviously Larry had tried to say that he had cut himself prior, so they're thinking he's going to maybe use that as an excuse. Now it would be on October the 27th when Psymate, they all meet up and they basically want to have a discussion. Do we believe we have enough evidence to formally charge this man? They all agree that they do. The next day they were able to secure a warrant, and that was for hair and blood samples from Larry. And everything just perfectly aligned because they got that on the 28th, and then on the 29th was the civil suit court date. You know how Larry's trying to sue everyone and their dog? Yeah. So this is all going ahead. At the October the 29th hearing, Larry's lawyer says that there's not even a scintilla of evidence to tie my client to the murders. Right. You're obviously not in the labs, hun. Now, Judge Paul Plunkett, he had reviewed a sealed affidavit and he refused to grant him access. And as Eyler left the courtroom that day, 2 investigators would hand over the warrant for his hair samples and his blood samples. Now, when the blood sample comes back, that would reveal that his blood type was O positive. Not A positive like the blood stain, so even if he had fell and cut himself, that blood on the bottom of his shoe was not his own. But I'll tell you who did have type A blood, his victim from the scene. Now Eyler, he would be charged with Ralph Khaleesi's murder that very same day. On that very same day of October the 29th, his bail was set at $1 million. You know, who's going to raise that for him? No one. And his trial would be set for December the 19th. And this guy, like, you're caught, bruh. You know what I mean? Just admit it. But he's still denying everything because he genuinely thinks he is the smartest person in the room. So he's denying everything. He's given interviews saying that the police have ruined his reputation. He didn't have a good reputation to start with, but like, whatever. And he claimed that if he had actually murdered anyone, then real evidence would exist. Real evidence does exist, so what are you saying? Now, on November the 1st, the police, they would return to the home of Robert Little and they had another search warrant. In this particular hunt, they were hoping to find clothing of victims, possibly jewellery, maybe wallets, anything that belonged to them, so they have cold hard proof that he had murdered them. So they collect 221 items, that is clothing items, there's pills, Polaroids, jewellery, but even in this, there was nothing directly linking him to the victims. However, they did find a key that had matched one that was found underneath Stephen Egan's body. Why was that there? And this had fit a door of an office that Larry Eyler had worked in 1982. Now, things weren't going too well with Larry's lawyer. I think Larry's lawyer was kind of grown sick of him and his constant need to speak to the press. And instead of Larry listening to him and taking things on board, he decided, I'm going to switch my lawyer up. So he gets a new lawyer, and this lawyer says the same thing. Larry, Laza, we have got to stop speaking to the public. You are digging yourself a deeper hole, my friend. So, in December of 1983, the judge, I want to talk to this judge, okay? He said that the initial traffic stop for Larry Eyler was valid, but his extended detention and seizure was not. This meant that any critical evidence at this point could be suppressed. Now, there was another hearing set for January the 23rd of 1984, and this was to decide whether or not to quash the warrant and suppress even more critical material. And it's like, Larry Eyler at this point, he has been charged, but his entire case now is threatening to collapse over a constitutional technicality. Like, please, just please don't follow the rulebook this once. Let us get this monster. So the January 1984 suppression hearing comes around, and one of the detectives, they admit that Larry was detained for longer so the Indiana task force could arrive, and not because Larry was arrested for murder. And this is no ideal, I can't lie to you. Now, the only formal charge on the record at that point was solicitation of sex. And then there was even more damaging testimony and evidence that revealed that Lake County and Chicago officers, they had entered John Dobrovolsky's home without a search warrant, which again is another constitutional red flag and really doesn't work in our favour. So then February the 1st of 1984 rolls around, and Judge Block, his ruling was a complete bombshell. So he agrees that Eyler did in fact sign a Miranda waiver, but he had stated that the investigators had held him and questioned him for offences that were completely unrelated to the solicitation charge. This then tainted every single piece of evidence that stemmed from this detainment. He had then stated that the authorities' possession of Larry Eyler's boots and then also the plaster cast of the tyre treads, these had been obtained without proper seizure and therefore they completely violated the exclusionary rule. The judge had also criticised the affidavit that was compiled to get the warrant to search Robert Little's home, stating that he found it insufficient. The judge decided to suppress all the evidence that investigators and detectives had painstakingly put together since the September 30th arrest. And then possibly the final blow to the prosecution was the fact that his bond was cut down from $1 million to $10,000. On February the 6th of 1984, Larry Eyler walked out of custody. Friends, family all gathered around him. And guess who paid the reduced bond? Robert frickin' Little. Someone take this man's money away. Now, there were conditions put in place that Larry Eyler couldn't leave the state of Illinois. Prosecution, they of course pushed back on this, saying it was ridiculous that his bond was reduced and the evidence that they've put together, which, although obtained illegally, is still huge evidence in the case of these murders. They believed that this was the monster killing all of these young men and now there is a monster walking free. Within weeks, Larry Eyler, he's moved to Rogers Park in Chicago. And you can probably imagine that the person paying a lot of this, buying new furniture for said apartment, was Robert Little himself. On July the 15th of 1984, Larry Eyler, he finally gets his little idiotic truck back and Robert Little pays for new tyres to be put on this. Yep. Wonder why. Now, the Lake County investigator Dan Collin, he had warned Larry Eyler's attorney after the suppression ruling and he had said, "We've traced Larry for a year. We've tied him to 21 murders. We can place him at 9 scenes with receipts, calls and gas purchases. His pattern is simple. He kills, then he calls. Now that you got him off, you better hope that there aren't any more long distance calls to Terre Finger snaps for Dan Collin, people. And these words are chillingly prolific. And what this prosecutor had said to Larry's attorney was completely true, because just 6 months later, he would commit another vicious act of evil. On August the 19th of 1984, around 10:30 p.m, Larry Eyler would lure a 16-year-old boy by the name of Daniel Bridges. He would lure him back to his Rogers Park apartment and he would just take full advantage of this young boy. This young boy hadn't had it easy, and I'll be honest, he was known to run away quite a lot. He had a lot of struggles going on. He was vulnerable, and Larry could sniff this out a mile away. This young boy had been involved in male prostitution since the age of 12. He wasn't gay, he was actually completely straight. But this was the only route he felt he could turn to. And this young boy, he was actually a very close friend of Irvin Gibson, one of Larry's earlier victims. Inside the apartment, Larry Eyler, he would bind Daniel Bridges to a chair. He would beat this young boy before torturing him and stabbing him to death. In his bathroom, Larry would dismember this young boy's body into 8 separate bits, draining the blood from every single piece and then stuffing his remains into plastic bags. On August the 21st of 1984, the janitor of the building would find this horror scene inside a dumpster that was not meant for use of any tenants. At first, he doesn't quite know what this is until one of the bags split open and Daniel Bridges' head rolls out of it. Now, this janitor, thankfully, he had actually seen Larry Eyler the day before using this very same dumpster that was not to be used by tenants, and he would immediately inform the police of this. Now, the second Larry Eyler's name comes across that radio, the Chicago police knew exactly who they had and what they were dealing with. Within minutes, the police, they had stormed Larry Eyler's unit and they immediately arrested him. Now, John Dobrovolsky, the ex-lover, he was also present at the time that he was arrested, but he would be released almost immediately. A forensic sweep would occur between August the 21st and August the 22nd, and let's just say, there was no doubt that a killing had occurred. The investigators would find massive amounts of blood that had been partially cleaned up. These were across Larry's bedroom, across the ceiling, across the chair, over the walls, over the floors. There was also more traces of blood found under the floorboards near the bathroom. Investigators had also uncovered Daniel Bridges' jeans that were still in the apartment at the time, and these were completely soaked with blood. They also found a Duke University t-shirt said to belong to Daniel, also in Larry Eyler's hamper, alongside a washed leather vest that belonged to Larry. They then moved on and they found a hacksaw with extra blades. There was trace amounts of blood still on this hacksaw. And they also found receipts that proved that Larry Eyler had bought this saw just days before. By the morning of August the 22nd, Chicago police, they're not playing games. They cannot give this man another chance. Eyler was immediately charged with the murder of Daniel Bridges, and this was the kind of charge that no amount of "I didn't touch him, I didn't do it, I've never met him," none of that would make this disappear. I mean, obviously he's going to try because, I mean, what, he has like 2 brain cells at a push? Maybe even 1.5? He tells the investigators the reason that his fingerprints was on the trash bags that contained the dismembered body parts was because he was simply trying to move those bags out the way so he could dump his own trash. But who was there before him? No idea. And it's just like, he genuinely thinks this is going to work. This is how bat crazy this guy is. What a loser. That very same day, Dr. Robert Steen, he was a battle-hardened medical examiner. He had seen the worst of the worst. Like, nothing really shocked him anymore. Even he would describe the scene as completely horrific. It was clear that Daniel Bridges had been beaten around the face, particularly around his eyes. He had been slashed with very shallow cuts to the face, but enough to make him bleed. He was also stabbed around 14 times with an awl or a pickaxe, and the focus of this attack seemed to be his sternum. And I'm really sorry to use this term, but this was a term that was used within the documents that I've looked at and been researching through. It says that Daniel had been gutted with deep knife wounds that were so severe that his intestines were also protruding. You know, I really thought I was going to hold it together in this video, and then it just hits you. This young boy had also been stabbed 3 times in the back with so much force that it was enough to puncture his heart and one of his lungs. Dr. Steen's conclusion was that Daniel was the victim of a prolonged, sadistic, deliberate torture session. Now, the prosecution at this point, they decide, we are not taking any chances here. We are going for the death penalty. Hallelujah. So they start stacking the charges. They've got aggravated kidnapping, unlawful restraint, concealment of a body, all on top of murder. And if the jury didn't bite on one, surely they would bite on the others. So it'd be July the 1st of 1986 when this trial would open in Cook County. Larry Eyler would plead before the judge not guilty. Again, this man, no brain whatsoever. He must have like a peanut or a kidney bean as a brain. So Larry, he was assigned 2 public defenders, and then his previous defence from the other case, they offered to do pro bono work for him, you know, just to round off the defence perfectly. I wouldn't even allow this guy to pay me to defend him, never mind giving him pro bono services. You fricking having me on? Now, the lawyers did strictly state, Larry, don't open your fricking mouth because there's nothing going on up top. You're going to say something heavily incriminating. I would have just gave him the rope to hang himself, to be honest. There you go. Up you go. State your case. Say whatever you want, Larry. Now, the prosecution, they open with a heavy statement. They discuss the blood, the bags, the head, the janitor, the fact that he had been seen dumping these bags in that dumpster. They had even quoted Larry Eyler because he spoke to the janitor when he was dumping these bags, because the janitor was like, hey, what you doing? That's no for tenants. And Larry Eyler turned around and said, just dumping some shit from my apartment. That is how little he thought of his victims. I'm gonna get angry. I can feel it. It's brewing. So then defence comes in and they're like, well, you know, he handled the bags, but he didn't commit the murder. Other men were in and out of his apartment. Maybe they killed Daniel. There was no evidence that Bridges was forced inside. This could have been consensual. And they're clutching at straws. I mean, every single point that they've brought to their defence is weak at best. So we come to witness testimony, right? And the first witness to take the stand was Robert Little. So he claims that he was with Larry between August the 17th and August the 19th, but he had driven back home to Terre Haute around 10:15 p.m. on the very night that Daniel Bridges was murdered, which, convenient, I'd say. Sounds like the kind of neat timeline that your lawyers would put together for you, doesn't it? Now, on July the 2nd, Dr. Robert Steen, he would basically walk the courtroom through the autopsy. He explains to them, "This is one of the worst cases I have ever seen in my life. In all the years that I've done this and all the things that I've seen, this might be the worst." He had noted that the serration patterns on Daniel Bridges' bones matched perfectly with those of the hacksaw. Now, the defence, they come forward. They don't come forward with much, but they say, well, there was cocaine and alcohol in Daniel Bridges' system, so that tells us that he walked in there voluntarily. Even if Daniel entered that apartment voluntarily, okay, he didn't voluntarily say, "Murder me, torture me, hurt me in the most horrific ways possible." So it's absolute BS to say that just because someone had maybe taken cocaine, drank some alcohol, doesn't mean they wanted this. Their whole argument is null and void because it makes no frickin' sense. I was getting so angry there, I started like battering my blusher. So the janitor who had seen Larry dispose of these bags that ended up containing human remains, he had also testified that Larry was going back and forth to his storage locker around a dozen times. Larry kept telling him, "Oh, I'm just getting some tools for a work job." We know what he used these tools for. And then obviously he had witnessed Larry go to the dumpster 3 times that very day with multiple bags. On July the 7th, John Dobrovolsky, he would also testify. Now, he claimed that he had called Larry multiple times the night that the murder was committed. So he called him around 8:15, again at 11:25, and then again at 2:45 a.m. And apparently on all 3 of these calls, Larry told John, "Don't come over, Robert Little's still here." And you know how Robert gets. Robert gets jealous. Now, when Larry had finally left his apartment to go over to John's, John didn't get to come over to Larry's, Larry went to John's, but John had stated that Larry had obviously just showered and seemed very uninterested in sex, which was very unusual for him. But the defence, they pounce on this and they're like, "Oh, well, that must mean then that he had consensual sex with Daniel. That's why he didn't want sex. He's satisfied. Yep, that's it, case closed." Oh, idiots. Like, where did you get your law degree? It must have been on the back of a cornflakes box. Now, Robert Little, he comes back into the picture and he actually corroborates a lot of John's story. However, he sticks to his story that he had left around 10:15 p.m. before the last sighting of Daniel Bridges. So on July the 8th, forensics, they come forward, they give their testimony, and they state that there was no semen found in or on Daniel. And this supports the theory that Larry Eyler had just lured him in simply to torture and murder him. However, under cross-examination, this very same person would state that there was blood on fingernails in Larry Eyler's ashtray that didn't match his or Daniel Bridges, hinting possibly that there may have been an accomplice there. So everyone's came forward, gave their testimony, the defence has spoke a whole lot of crap, and then the jury goes away to deliberate. They deliberate for 3 hours, and on July the 9th of 1986, the jury would return guilty on aggravated kidnapping, guilty on lawful restraint, guilty on murder and concealment of a body. Larry Eyler facially didn't really give much away. He didn't really seem to flinch. However, his hand was dug into his attorney's thigh like he was gripping on for dear life. He was white knuckling it. Don't know why he's grabbing his attorney's thigh, but he was. Now, during sentencing, the prosecution, they had brought in earlier assault victims of Larry Eyler's. Ones that Larry had bound, gagged, stabbed. So they have these other victims who has come forward and said, "This man tried to kill us. This man hurt us, tortured us, done the worst things to us." So what does the defence do? They bring out Larry's family, his mother, his sisters. They even bring in a Catholic chaplain to humanise him. His mother and sister, they weep on the stand and they talk about his abusive childhood. His mother even talks about her serial marriages and how none of those guys were good either. And listen, we're not arguing that. His childhood was terrible at best. I can sympathise for that child, but know the monster he grew to be. He's made his decisions. He is evil, vile, vicious, and rotten to his core, and he deserves to rot. These people, they always come in and they always try and blame the childhood, and I get it. A childhood can really shape someone, but I know people. We all know people. Some of you might even be people who have experienced horrific childhoods, but you do not grow up to be a monster. You grow up to be an empathetic, kind human being because you know how it feels to be in that situation, and you would never want anyone else to feel that way. On the 3rd of October of 1986, the judge would return at 10 a.m. and he had made his decision. He had said that the murder was so barbaric that it defied any description. Larry Eyler would be sentenced to death by lethal injection. The judge called him an evil person and stated, "You truly deserve to die for your acts." Larry Eyler was then transferred to Pontiac's Correctional Centre that very same day, where he would be placed on death row. Now, do you think that Larry Eyler is going to sit on death row silent and just wait for his execution date? No, me neither, and he didn't, because there would be appeals galore. And who would he turn on but his accomplice, Robert Little? Larry tries to claim that Robert Little was the one who murdered Daniel Bridges and that he was simply the guy who dismembered and disposed of the body. Like that's any better. He stated that Robert Little had killed him and that he was forced to clean up the mess. He had also stated he found it very unfair that Robert Little's vehicle had never ever been forensically tested, and he was basically stating that Robert Little's alibi was as soft as a wet tissue. Now, the Illinois court, they did hear this appeal on May the 10th of 1989, but honestly, they were kind of just done with Larry Eyler. They really had no interest in hearing any more from this man, so his execution date would be set for March the 14th of 1990. So then, November of 1990, Larry has this powerhouse attorney, Kathleen Zellner, assigned to his case. Zellner had become very quickly convinced that if Larry thought for a second he could dodge that needle in his arm, he might give up more evidence. They might be able to get a lesser conviction. Now, by late 1990, Larry would be indicted on another murder, and that was the one of Stephen Egan. They were able to use evidence that had previously been suppressed to support that he was guilty of murdering him. Now, at this point, he is faced with the possibility of a second death sentence. Larry doesn't want this. What if it speeds things up? What a terrifying thought. So he flipped the script. He hands over a 17-page confession. I don't know if it was front and back, okay, but it was a 17-page confession basically detailing the murder of Stephen Egan, but he carefully weaved this little web that Robert Little was heavily involved. And not only that, but he was trying to cut a deal for a 60-year prison term rather than the lethal injection. The audacity of this man and his moustache, I swear. So, December the 13th of 1990, Larry would stand up in a courtroom and he would plead guilty to the murder of Stephen Egan. He very coldly testified that Robert Little was knowing and willing. And Larry Eyler, he would even pass a polygraph test backing up this claim. So, January of 1991 comes around and Kathleen Zellner, she comes up with a great plan for her client. Larry has told her, you know, if you can go to the court and tell them I will confess to another 20 murders if they revoke my death sentence. This would mean that Larry would have life in prison without the possibility of parole, but that he would get to live a long life, or, you know, as long as the prison system and its inmates would allow. Larry had stated if they didn't do this, if they didn't revoke his death sentence, he would take his secrets to the grave. So then we come to April the 11th of 1991. Guess who's on trial? Robert Little. He's on trial in Vermilion County. Now, he goes up and, shocker to no one, he pleads not guilty. Larry, he is brought in to testify against Robert. He paints him as this little sadistic Professor Weasley man, stating that he had lured Egan with booze and drugs and the promise of a good time. Larry had stated that Robert Little performed some bondage acts on Stephen Egan and then stabbed him to death whilst he took Polaroids and masturbated. Larry Eyler had said that Robert Little ordered him to get a knife and kill that motherfucker. Now, Robert's defence team, they had told the court that Larry Eyler has every single reason to lie. And obviously Larry, he said that these Polaroids were taken, that, you know, he masturbated over the body. And they believed that Larry was lying to save his own skin. They had also noted that Polaroids were never ever found from any crime scenes. Robert Little's mother, she also got up and testified. She was absolutely furious. And she stated that her son had spent every single Christmas with her since 1958, presumably not taking breaks to fly back to Indiana for murders. Now, unfortunately for the defence, the prosecution, they were able to produce receipts and phone records. And despite these receipts, Robert Little's lawyer, they had told him, do not testify. They were worried that the trial might pivot away from the murder to his private life. The jury would deliberate for 7 hours on the case of Robert Little. And on April the 17th of 1991, this man would be acquitted of all charges. He's standing there, he's smugly smiling, hugging his lawyer, and he walked out of court and went right back to teaching at ISU. Stephen Egan's family were distraught and they walked out of this court furious. Of course they did. How could another monster get away with it? There was receipts, there was evidence, and it still wasn't enough. Then on March the 6th of 1994, Larry Eyler, he would die. But he didn't die from lethal injection. He would die from age-related complications. He was 41 years old and he'd apparently been gravely ill for around 10 days. And whilst I'm glad that this evil cretin is dead, it's not the justice I would want for the families. Now, 2 days after Larry had passed away, Kathleen Zellner, she actually took a stand in public. And the murders that Larry had confessed to privately, all 17 of them, she was able to go up and name these victims, or at least describe who the victims were if they didn't have the names. But she still insisted on Larry's behalf that Larry had stated that Robert Little was the only one who did any murdering, and that he was still out there walking free. The crimes of Larry Eyler, they have left a trail of complete devastation, but his name should never ever eclipse the lives that he stole. Each and every single victim had hopes, dreams, a family who loved them, and futures that were so violently taken away from them. As always, please remember their names, not the killer. Speak their names and honour their stories, and let's all continue to push for a world where vulnerable lives are no longer treated as disposable. All justice begins with remembering, and that is exactly what we need to do. But my loves, that is it for another true crime and makeup episode. I really hope I've been able to do this case justice. It's probably a longer one, so hopefully you've stuck around to the end. If you have, then let me know in the comments down below. Leave like a black heart, maybe. Let's do a black heart if you stuck around to this point. And if you commented before watching, which I love to see, then just leave another comment or edit your comment and leave the little black heart. That is it for today's video. Don't forget any details you need regarding me, myself and I, social media handles, products used on my face today, I will link them all down below. I have had issues linking products recently, but I think I've rectified it, so it should all be good. Your case suggestions can all be left in the comments down below. I read them all, go through them all, add them to my big list, and I do eventually get around to covering them. Also, I have decided I'm going to start posting more on Instagram as well, so if you do want to give me a follow there, TikTok as well, I am going to try and get back on that because I just don't have the time. Like, I work full time and then I do YouTube. It's basically like another full-time job with the amount of work that goes into it. All worth it though, because hopefully one day I'll do this full time. But yeah, give me a little follow over on my socials because I will be posting more, especially autumn and winter months. That's when I come alive. But that is it for today. Please, please, please remember, be a good person. Do not be a bad person. Stay safe. Look after each other. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye!